All right. Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody, for joining us at today's event on work dropouts, disability growth, and options for reform. My name is Matt Whitinger. I'm a Rowe Scholar here at the American Enterprise Institute. I previously worked for too many years, several decades, on Capitol Hill for the U.S. House Committee on Ways and Means, including as the staff director of the subcommittee with jurisdiction over the Supplemental Security Income Program, which provides disability benefits for millions of low-income Americans. Today's event will explore what's been happening in recent decades among prime-age workers, especially men who could be working but too often remain on the sidelines of the economy. We'll review why that occurs, their interaction with disability programs, and most importantly, how we might help more get back into work. Let me briefly review our format along with the bios of our speakers today. First up after me will be Jason Turner, the Executive Director of the Secretary's Innovation Group, or SIG, an influential association of conservative state welfare and workforce directors. Jason previously implemented pro-work reforms for Mayor Rudy Giuliani in New York City and Governor Tommy Thompson in Wisconsin. He will set the stage, including by reviewing a disability reform proposal developed by SIG. Next, our first of two panels will provide background on the disability crisis afflicting too many of our neighbors. Nicholas Eberstadt will lead off. Nick holds the Harry Wendt Chair in Political Economy here at AEI and has written extensively on disability, work, and so many other topics that it's simplest for me just to call him a giant polymath and leave it at that. For today's purposes, his most recent relevant work includes his 2022 book, Men Without Work, Post-Pandemic Edition. Nick will be followed by Richard Burkhauser, who is a non-resident senior fellow here at AEI and an emeritus professor of public policy at Cornell University. Rich served as a member of the Council of Economic Advisors during President Trump's first term, and his extraordinary career has focused on how public policies affect the employment and well-being of vulnerable populations. Finally, we'll hear from Dr. Jennifer Christian, the chair and co-founder of the Alliance for Bridging Health and Work. Jennifer is a nationally recognized expert on minimizing the disruption health problems have on working people's livelihoods by improving the support they receive to get back on track. Jennifer unfortunately can't join us here today in person, but has submitted a video statement which we will view in short order. Then I will moderate some questions, including from our audience here and potentially online. If anyone watching online wishes to submit a question for consideration, please email it to hadarzeevi, that's hadar.zeevi @aei.org. Then we'll proceed with our second panel, which will review practical solutions, including lessons from a noteworthy demonstration project in Kentucky. Jason Turner will lead that second panel off. He'll be followed by Johnny Collette, the Deputy Director of the Human Development Institute at the University of Kentucky. Previously, Johnny served as Assistant U.S. Education Secretary for the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, and as a Program Director and High School Special Education teacher. His roles have a common theme: an unwavering commitment to improving outcomes for people with disabilities. Finally, we will hear from David Stapleton, who's been conducting disability policy research in and about this town for 35 years, including a decade as director of Mathematica's Center for Studying Disability Policy. Much of Dave's work has focused on how disability programs affect the employment and income of people with disabilities and the potential of reforms to improve their lives. As at the end of the first panel, we will then have some time for questions for our second panel, including from our audience both here and online. And with that, let me turn it over to Jason Turner for his opening remarks.
Matt, I should have been closer to the edge. Sorry.
Quite all right. Clicker's front and center.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak with you about what is, I think you're going to discover, is a bigger national issue than you were aware of. Some of you are going to go away saying, I read the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal. why did I never know about the large number of American men between the ages of 25 and 54, the guts of American productive life for men who are not working and not looking for work. And our first presenter after me will be Nick, who will describe those statistics. As Matt pointed out, I am the executive director of an association of state human services secretaries and workforce directors who report to their governors and are interacting with their economy and their social welfare system in their state. There is a national labor shortage, and our respective governors are demanding that we as agency heads deliver more work participants into the economy. They're calling our human services and workforce directors and say, I can't get businesses to move to the state if I can't deliver the labor. And here is the first thing I'd like to describe. No, this is not it. Back. Nope. Let me keep going. All the way back, yeah. Okay, that is the labor force participation rate over 20 years. We have lost 2.5% of all adults in the labor force, according to the BLS, over the past 20 years. That is a big number. If you get 3% national wage, national growth, economic growth in a given year, that's a huge number. But here we can see that every year we're missing 2.7% of people who used to be in the labor force. So what's going on? Today's unemployment rate is at a low 4.3%. That's full employment. And yet simultaneously, we're missing 2.7%, 2.5% of Americans not working anymore. So Nick is going to go into this, but I'm just going to describe in a nutshell, from 1965, there's been a great, to the present, there's been a great male flight from work that he's going to be talking about. It's men not working and not looking for work, not looking for work. We can't find these men as secretaries of workforce and human services. They don't come into our job centers, and they're not usually on benefit programs with a work requirement. You may not have known that we can't find these guys. So how are they living? What are they doing for living? Nick is going to describe just how many of these, the proportion of these men not looking for work are living on disability. And it's a number that's going to surprise you, so wait for it. And how many of these men are actually out there compared to all men? That number is coming up shortly. So since the early 1980s, when Congress loosened eligibility requirements, the number of people who've applied for and gone on to disability has increased. And we are going to ask ourselves, what are the personal circumstances of going on to disability? Although there are economic circumstances and social welfare circumstances, but what about the individual that actually applies and gets on when, with the right kind of service and dedication, he could remain in the labor force? Is he better off? Well, the research shows that after you get your first check on disability, your physical health declines. Maybe you might think, well, you don't have to earn an income, so you have more time to deal with health issues. But actually, that's not what happens. Your physical health declines. Your mental health declines, particularly depression, but other things as well. Your family stress increases once you're on disability. You have a reduction in interaction with the community, and your volunteerism declines when you're on disability. time spent on screens such as TV, computer, and phone go up. Nick will talk about that. And the absence of time at work often is substituted with an increase in substance abuse. So that's your new life once you're on disability. And all of us should want for personal as well as social reasons, to minimize the number of people who have their life on disability. Thank you.
All right, well, Nick and Rich, you guys want to join me on the dais here? And Nick, the podium is yours.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, thank you, Matt. And thank you, Jason. I'm going to talk about a problem that too often is kind of hiding in plain sight. And this is the decades and indeed generations-long flight from work by prime age men, not my designation, Bureau of Labor Statistics, 25 to 54-year-old civilian, non-institutional men who are part of the backbone of the workforce, and they're not just workers. Those are the key years for forming families and raising children. So it's a significant component of our society. What I'm going to show you here is a chart with the monthly percentages of prime age men without paid work from 1965 to this year. You will probably notice a sort of a ratcheting up thing that's going across from left to right. And if you notice it, it's because it's happening. No less important than this gradual and inexorable increase in the percentage of prime age men with no paid work is the level that this unworking proportion now constitutes. That red line there is the percentage of prime age men calculated in the very first US census that used that metric, which is in 1940. And you will notice that for most of the 21st century, the proportion of men without paid work is higher than it was in 1940. Now, I seem to recall from third and fourth grade history that there was something called the Great Depression that was ending around 1940. And back in those days, it's the tail end of the Great Depression, the unemployment rate for men was, well, the unemployment rate for the nation was almost 15%. So if I'm going to tell you that there is a depression scale problem with work for American men today, I'm not making this up. Back when the employment statistical system that we use today was devised back in 1939 and 1940, there were really just two categories in employment that were designated for people. There was having work, being employed, or looking for a job, which is being unemployed and looking for work. The idea that grown men would neither be working nor looking for work would have been a fantastical idea back in 39 and 40, which is why there was no such category in our statistical compendia for this. But what has happened over the post-war period, and especially since 1965, is that the fastest growing component of our prime male population has been the men who are neither working nor looking for work. That's that gray jiggly line there. The blue thing that's going up and down, kind of tracking the business cycle and the sessions and boom times, is the head count for unemployed prime age guys. And you will notice there, those two lines have not touched for over 30 years. There hasn't been a month, either during the crash of '08 or during the terrible COVID shutdown, when there were more unemployed prime age men than prime age men who were neither working nor looking for work. And if you see that little row thing that I've got on the chart there, you'll see that decade by decade, the ratio of NILF, not in labor force men, to unemployed is going up. It surpassed the unemployed in the 60s. And by last year, for every unemployed guy in this age group, there were 3.5 guys who were neither at work nor looking for work. So if you are looking only at the unemployment rate, you are missing over 3/4 of the problem here. We're talking about roughly 7 million men who are not in the labor force in this age group. I wanted to show you this chart because I think it's meaningful in trying to understand what's going on here. I mean, I'm not a labor economist, and I don't even play one on television, but when I look at the labor economics literature discussing this problem, it's mainly talking about the problem of male dropouts as a structural and economic transformation problem. Less demand for low-skilled work, changing structure of the economy. If you look at the percentage of men who are not in labor force, which is that blue jiggly thing there, it's not quite a straight line upward, but it's pretty close to it. We could even call it a kind of a social science straight line, since people are a little bit, unruly. You can see there is no correspondence between the rise of that line and the periods of recession, the gray bars on there. Something else is causing this, and it doesn't look like economic transformation or structural change to me. I came out with a book called Men Without Work, America's Invisible Crisis in 2016, trying to cast some light on the program. And it was basically pretty well received. But there were people who criticized me, and to kind of like boil down the criticism to a kind of an elevator version, it was kind of, Eberstadt, you idiot, you don't understand that there isn't any work out there. Now, I don't think that that was true in 2016. I think I could argue convincingly that wasn't true in 2016. But during and after the COVID crisis, it certainly wasn't true. This is a chart showing the number of unfilled jobs in the United States, right, during this period. We had at one point over 12 million unfilled jobs. We had a peacetime labor shortage, never seen in our country before. And despite that, men were not moving out of the NILF category and back into the workforce. You have to ask why. When I did this book in 2016, I showed that the proportion of these dropout men obtaining benefits from one or more disability program was actually a bit higher than the economics literature conventionally indicated. If you looked at one of the Census Bureau surveys that looks at government benefit program participation, there were at least 4 different disability programs that they followed there that didn't talk to each other. So you couldn't come up with a kind of like a universal figure for how many people are getting one or more disability benefits. I calculated back then, or my people are helping me out calculate back then, that over half of the dropout men were receiving one or more benefits. Quite a few were receiving 2 or more benefits, and about 2/3 were in a household receiving a benefit. That, I think, is kind of important to understand because the benefit program may not have caused this situation, but is certainly helping to finance this non-work life that the beneficiaries were in. I'm going to update those numbers so I have better numbers for you for a more recent period. I don't have those yet, but stay tuned, I hope I will. Last thing I wanted to point out is something on time use. Time use surveys are self-reported. These are what people who are surveyed say they do from the moment they wake up in the morning till the moment they go to sleep at night, and also how long they sleep. And you will see that I've got some red highlighted numbers on there. The most important red highlighted numbers, I think, are the category for the NILF men, for the neither employed nor educated in training men, in socializing, relaxing, and leisure, and right below that, screen time, watching screens. We can't tell what they're watching, what type of devices they're watching, and we certainly don't know what programs or things they're watching. But they're spending a lot of time watching things. About 5 hours a day, every day. That's, weekends and holidays as well. You're getting towards 2,000 hours a year. That's almost like a full-time job. And a lot of the people are doing that on pain medication. About half, not quite half, but almost half of the prime age male dropouts say they're taking pain medication every day. So it's not just, playing Call of Duty, it's playing Call of Duty stoned. And I don't think that that's the sort of skill set that's going to get you back into the workforce really quickly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. All right, Rich.
As can be seen in Figure 1, NIC's results parallel and to some degree are driven by the substantial increase in the number of working age adults receiving DI and SSI benefits. With the exception of its first step, the DI and SSI disability determination process is exactly the same and as is their growth patterns from 1974 when SSI first became operational through 2023. To understand the driving forces of this growth, it is important to recognize that disability is not an immutable state. Rather, it is the product of the health as well as the social, cultural, and economic environment faced by individuals with impairments. And for that reason, disability policy affects the behavior of such individuals. As reforms in many OECD countries demonstrate, generous program benefits conditioned on not working led to lower levels of work and higher benefit rates than did work-first programs focusing on keeping individuals with impairments in the labor market. Incentivizing individuals with impairments to stay in the labor force is far easier than incentivizing existing beneficiaries to return to work. Gaining control of disability roles is best done by lowering this flow, that is the incidence rate of new beneficiaries, than in trying to reduce existing caseloads, that is their prevalence rates. As the failure of the Ticket to Work program attests, DI and SSI define disability as an inability to engage in any substantial gainful activity because of a medically determinable physical or mental impairment that can be expected to result in death or can be expected to last for a continuous period of not less than 12 months. Hence, these programs are intended only for those who are judged totally and permanently disabled. This overarching SGA definition has remained the same. While this overarching SGA definition has remained the same, changes have occurred in the way this definition has been operationalized and implemented over time. The rise in the DI roles that you see in Figure 1 in the 1970s led to a tightening in the medical screening process and eventually in 1980 to a congressional mandate that the Social Security Administration initiate periodic reviews of current beneficiaries to determine if they were still disabled. While this led to a decline in the DI rolls, political backlash from it led to the 1984 passage of Public Law 98-460, which instituted a medical improvement standard that said benefits could only be terminated if certain conditions were met and put the burden of proof on SSA to demonstrate that the individuals were capable of engaging in SGA. Unfortunately, it also made the DI screening process more subjective and complex. It directed that SSA, when assessing applications, place increased weight on the applicant's statements and about their own pain and discomfort. It directed SSA to relax its standards in screening for mental illness and to consider multiple non-severe ailments to be disabling, even if none were disabling by themselves. These changes, in large part, are responsible for the increase in DI awards that you see there in the figure, and the growth in total adult DI and SSI recipients from 1974 to 2014, as well as a shift in their composition towards claimants with low mortality disorders such as mental illness and back pain. Now, here's some very good news, and it is that the continuous increase in DI rolls after the passage of this law peaked in 2014 at 10.3 million and has declined since then to 8.7 million in 2023. But this is still almost 3 times the 3.2 million DI beneficiaries in 1983. So, Figure 2 provides 2 more sophisticated measures of program growth. First, adult beneficiaries relative to the insured disability population, that is, the DI prevalence rate. And second, new adult beneficiary related to the insurance disability population, the DI incidence rate. The bottom line is that these 2 more sophisticated measures of program growth result in basically the same trends as seen in Figure 1. Both continuously fall below their peak through years 2023. And in the figures that Nick showed about not in the labor force, they actually also stop rising and fall a little bit during this period that the DI benefits are falling. So there's clearly a relationship between these two, this trend and the one Nick is picking up. But as seen in Figure 3, the Office of the Actuary's predictions for future growth in these 2 rates out to 2100 raise some additional concerns. Their preferred middle estimates used to estimate the long-run financial stability of DI predicts a rise in both prevalence and incidence rates in the near future and the longer term. So in my remaining 2 slides, I will provide additional insights into how these rule changes in the 1980s, as well as how more recent administration of them impacted gatekeeping decisions at each of the 5 steps of DI and SSI eligibility. The first step reviews employment status for DI, and it's easy to verify an applicant's work history and current earnings. For SSI, it's relatively easy to determine the person's income and assets. Almost no applicants are denied at this level. The next 2 steps evaluate the severity of an applicant's impairment and compare them to listed conditions. Determining whether an applicant's impairment is sufficient to prevent the applicant from working is a key challenge for any disability program. SSA attempts to set the level of severity according to current medical research on the conditions in questions. Unfortunately, there is no single answer about the effect most impairments will have on workability. Work limitations associated with impairments vary by individual and by the social and physical environment in place. Some impairments are easier to judge than others, but the more difficult it is to establish severity of an impairment or its potential effect on an applicant's ability to work, the more administrative discretion plays in determining the applicant's outcome. This is especially the case with mental illness and musculoskeletal conditions, back pain, which are among the most difficult to measure. For applicants who do not meet or exceed the medical listings, the Disability Determination Service gatekeepers consider a set of vocational criteria, age, education, and skill levels for a large set of occupations in the next 2 steps. Step 4 determines if the applicant can return to their past employment. Does the applicant's current vocational characteristics still match or exceed those in the applicant's prior occupation? If not, the 5th step assesses the applicant's ability to do other work. That is, are there other occupations that the applicant could find work in, given their current vocational characteristics? Presently, the majority of DDS gatekeepers' initial judgments are based on vocational criteria rather than on the severity of the applicant's impairment condition alone, increasingly so with regard to mental illness and musculoskeletal conditions. Then we have the appeals process. Those denied benefits initially can be reconsidered. Failing reconsideration, they can appeal to the administrative law judge level. In doing so, applicants can, for the first time in the process, be represented by counsel and present expert witnesses. In contrast, SSA can do neither at this level. A sign that the disability determination process became much more discretionary is that the appeals at the ALJ level increased substantially over the history of the program. Once on the system, few beneficiaries are reevaluated unless they work beyond a relatively low earnings threshold, and very few beneficiaries exit the program other than through death or reaching retirement age. At normal retirement age, a DI beneficiary officially leaves the program but continues to receive the same benefits, but now paid out of the retirement trust fund. So what are the 4 takeaways from my 10 minutes talk here? 1, the majority of initial disability determinations no longer meet the medical listings alone. More than half no longer do. 2, those who do meet the medical listings include either mental illness, depression, anxiety, or musculoskeletal conditions, back pain. 63% did so in 2023. 3, between 1992 and 2008, on average, 2 out of 3 applicants denied at step 5 who appealed at the ALJ level were successful. Reforms in the training, and another piece of good news, reforms in the trainings and monitoring of ALJ judges has reduced this rate to around 50% since 2012. And you can clearly see this as in the reduction in the rates to around 50% in overturning the initial decisions since 2012. Allowing SSA to be represented by counsel and to bring expert witnesses would further this decline. Finally, steps 4 and 5 depend on a list of vocational characteristics of all occupations in the United States based on data from the 1970s. SSA has updated this list with a new occupational survey at a cost of over $300 million. However, this updated list is still not being used by SSA in the adjudication process of the disability claims. Clearly, it should be. I was in the Peace Corps in Jamaica between 1970 and 1972 when Michael Manley, a reform prime minister candidate, won election with what I thought was an amazing political slogan, "Better must come." That is a fitting imperative for future disability reforms. I'll end there.
Okay. Thank you, Rich. I'm just going to grab the clicker here. All right. And if our technology works. Next up is
I want to
Jennifer
start at an unusual place by asserting that few people realize that the loss of livelihood is a devastating outcome of a health problem. In fact, it's the next to worst possible outcome for an adult and can often be prevented. Next slide. Everybody knows that the worst outcome of a health problem is that you die. But few people realize that for an adult, loss of livelihood, being sidelined, is actually the second worst outcome, worse than being left with a permanent impairment. Long-term worklessness, we know from studies, causes declines in physical and mental health, as well as personal, family, social, and economic well-being. Entry onto long-term disability roles, especially SSDI, is usually a one-way street. People become trapped after they leave the workforce. Loss of livelihood can be caused by needless, potentially preventable work disability. Work disability is not going to work or because of a health problem, attributed to a health problem. A life on disability benefits, many people on disability will tell you, is a life of poverty. And as one guy said, I have nothing to do and no money to do it with. So this third worst outcome, permanent impairment, which is often thought of as the worst outcome, people with disabilities will be pleased to tell you that they have good lives, many of them. and that the loss of or irreversible damage to a body part or the loss of a physiological capability doesn't wreck your life once you have made a successful adjustment to life. So for simplicity's sake, we'll have a little description here about how work disability is created. You do need to have a health condition that affects function. If you don't have one, then it's fraud. But if you have a health condition that affects function, that doesn't necessarily mean there's work disability. You have to combine it with the person's loss of ability or willingness to make the effort to cope with the extra discomfort or extra effort that is involved in functioning. And also, usually, but sometimes just by itself, work disability can be created by a health condition that affects function plus a lack of external support, which may be social, emotional, administrative, logistical, or tangible. Next slide. Now, what many people don't realize is that we really do have a gap in the social fabric. The people who aren't working due to a health problem are left to fend for themselves with the impact that this is having on their life. The medical sector does not feel that it is their job to help people achieve the best possible outcome of their condition and have it not get in the way of them having a good life. They feel like that's not the medical issue. And the medical sector's reluctance to get involved creates delay and uncertainty for the worker. And on the other side of this, when the person is trying to come back to work or stay at work, the employer feels no commitment to making sure that the worker is successful because they think the problem is medical. It's not their job, it's private. And that again creates delay, uncertainty. And the longer people fall through this gap and stay in this land of limbo, the more toxic the environment. So the result of this gap in the social fabric is adverse secondary consequences of the original problem, making an original problem worse, which results in over-impairment, medically unnecessary work disability, self-defeating thoughts, job loss of who is able to contribute, leaves the workforce. We lose two things. We lose that person's productive contribution. That person loses a lifetime benefit of having income, and we as a country gain another person dependent on public benefits. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Nick, Rich, Jennifer, and Absentia for your remarks and sort of teeing us up today. Reminder, if anybody who's watching online has a question they would like to pose to Nick or Rich, to submit it to Hadar Zeevi, HADAR.ZEEVI@aei.org. In the meantime, we'll do some questions among us and then turn to the audience out here. So it's complicated stuff, but I think it's fair to say you can boil this down to a couple of basic points. As Nick pointed out, we're at Depression-era levels of non-work by prime-age males, and that's in a period now of full employment. One result, as Rich showed, is that we've had consistently rising dependence on disability benefits, both the low-income disability program and also the sort of work-based DI disability program, at least through the middle of the last decade with some moderation since then. Many of those claims have been in the categories of disability that are, as Rich said, hard to establish, right? So depression, anxiety, back pain, things of that sort. And then we'll talk about this more on the next panel, but as Rich noted, the gatekeeping system isn't really working as well as it should. And as Jennifer pointed out, one of the worst consequences for that is that individuals who might be working are not able to work. They are instead falling onto disability benefits, which has significant consequences for both them and for the country. So Nick, let me kind of head that point in your direction. So Jennifer said that she suggested there's a lot of losing that goes on here, right? There's losing for individuals, there's also losses for the country. The individual naturally loses their productive capacity and the potential for income, but the country also gains a benefit recipient and loses a potential taxpayer. Put that in context for us. Where are we at in terms of demographics, immigration, fertility, in terms of the country's ability to withstand what in essence are excess benefit recipients, as opposed to the need for more taxpayers to support, especially our payroll tax funded programs in the future? Are we in a good position to tolerate, in effect, excess disability when we might be able to take steps to help more people be successfully in work instead of receiving benefits?
We're in a, we're extraordinarily poorly prepared for this, I would argue, Matt. As many of you know, the United States is a below replacement level fertility country. At current levels of childbearing, we're about 20 to, not quite 25%, but 23% below the level that would be needed even for population stability, which, all other things being equal, would mean over the long term a stable size of the workforce. So if we did not have immigration in the United States, as of like lunchtime today, the working age population would begin to shrink. The only thing that is keeping the working age population from shrinking is immigration. And as some of our other AEI colleagues have written in a paper today, and in a paper earlier this year, in conjunction with some Brookings colleagues, it's not impossible that this year we'll actually see a very, very, very slight drop in total US population because of reductions in immigration and the native-born demographic profile that I described to you. So one of the ways of adjusting to these demographic realities is to have higher workforce participation rates, and for the working age population, to have higher workforce participation for older Americans, live longer, work longer. It makes kind of sense. The bad news is that for older Americans, there was a sharp drop in labor force participation, and we lost about 2 million from this pool of would-be workers who've just never come back. You've seen what's happened with the men. We have a kind of a good news story with prime age female participation in the labor force. Those are at the highest levels we've ever recorded. What we're not seeing there, in looking at the good news headlines, is that there is a sort of a doppelganger to the male dropouts, which is women without work. The 25 to 54s, neither looking for work, neither working nor looking for work, with no children at home and no husband at home. And that group, which I had in that last slide of mine, has been growing exponentially for 2 decades. Against the 7 million dropout men, we've got about 3.5 million women who'd be in this category. And just to give you a sense of how things are there, that time use slide that I showed indicated that they report about half of the women self-report. About half of the women in that category are using pain medication every day. So that's a kind of a story that we should be paying attention to also.
Rich, you want to join in here? Or do your points about the DI roles going up in the future add some color to this too?
Absolutely. What I should say is that we've had a rapid rise in the prevalence rate of people on disability from 1983 that finally has stopped and has declined. So some of my friends would say, well, Rich, have we solved the problem? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I think we haven't solved it in the sense that even with those declines to 2023, we're still 3 times higher in terms of the prevalence rates than we were in the 1980s, and we can't really be less healthy as a society to justify that. What we did was failed to do what many European countries have already done and recognize that if you're going to have a person who experiences an onset of a disability, what you need to do first is to use vocational rehabilitation or other sorts of work-first solutions to keep them off the disability rolls. The longer you wait, the harder it is to get the person back into the workforce. And when they get on the rolls, what we know is spending lots of money to try to get them off the rolls after that has not been successful in any country where they've tried that. So there's plenty to do. And the other happy note that people talk about is, well, hey, doesn't the disability insurance, isn't it now, it used to be in crisis, but now isn't it solvent for the next 75 years? The answer to that is yes, it is. But why are those people on disability? And just because we can pay for it, does it make sense to use our monies in that way to do it? Isn't it better to move the money forward into work first things and not have them be on the rolls in the first place?
Sure. So let's dive in a little bit more about the change in the disability caseload, both DI and SSI, in starting after about 2010 or so. That was driven mostly by SSA changes. So what does that suggest about other things that SSA might be able to do to head the program more in that same direction of, doing what you say, engaging people so that they either don't come out of the benefit roles or stay shorter while on the roles and more successfully go into work? Are there other things within SSA's purview that can happen?
Well, I think the thing that's it's so obvious that it should happen, and it hasn't, and it's very frustrating, as Mark Warshawski has talked about, who's AEI, is that we have finally we've spent $300 million to better estimate what the characteristics are of people who are in current jobs or current occupations in step 5. And we haven't implemented it. It didn't quite get done in the last year of the first Trump administration. And the Biden administration, for reasons that are not clear, decided not to use the data. And we have to figure out, as someone who believes in getting the best data possible, I've never heard an argument for not implementing this, and that should happen. And that's completely within the current administration's ability to do it. So I'm hopeful it was something that Trump's administration would do.
Can I say one
Sure,
more thing
join
about
in.
that?
Yep.
One of the, we're going to jump down a nerd rabbit hole for a moment, if you'll excuse me on this. Rich is a pioneer in something that is called linked administrative data, which means you take the federal government's actual beneficiary rolls, you sprinkle some privacy dust over it by the privacy fairy, and you link it up with other data sources that we know about, for instance, such as like monthly jobs report. If we did that, not just with our Social Security Administration data, with SSDI, SSI, and Social Security. There are people who are 50 years old who are getting Social Security because they worked for 10 quarters and aren't working now and can get Social Security essentially as a disability benefit. What we're not linking up there is veterans benefits, state level disability benefits, workman's comp, and we're talking about many, many, many millions of additional beneficiaries there. At the moment, there isn't anybody in Washington who can tell you how many people are on various disability benefits at the moment. And it would be, I think, a real public service to fill that gap.
So I'm going to ask the audience if they have any questions, but somebody online, speaking of nerd rabbit holes, Nick, I have one for you. Ask the question, can the panelists comment on the trend in gig work and independent contractors? Has there been an increase in this area for working age men that may have an impact on workforce participation rates as defined by BLS? Is that something outside of what you're seeing, or is that embedded in the data you're seeing?
I'm going to ask Rich to bat cleanup for me on this, but the delicate word here is in principle. In principle, the employment statistics should be capturing the gig work as well as all other work, because in principle, what the surveys that I was showing, the CPS surveys, are supposed to report on is whether a person had 1 hour, not a lot, 1 hour of paid work in the previous period that they're questioning them about. So gig work should be picked up. The question is, how well is it being picked up? I mean,
Right, I think it's harder to know. In the jobs reports and that sort of stuff, the best data comes from employers, but for gig work, you got to go out on the corner and look at the Uber people who are coming by. So it's...
Okay. Let me ask one more question, Nick, before we go to the audience.
there's a question over there. I see somebody.
Oh, okay, I'll get you in just one second. You wrote a piece this spring about shock therapy, basically suggesting that Washington was incapable, and I think by Washington you mean the legislative system was incapable of addressing this. Why do you think that is, and is there any hope for the legislative system doing what is necessary to attempt to turn around some of these trends you're seeing?
Oh, I would have said I was quite hopeful about this. Maybe they haven't acted on this, but I think there's quite a bit of promise here, Matt, because you do have to take a little bit of a stroll down memory lane to go back to the 1990s. But we had an extraordinarily important and effective reform of our social benefits programs. It was bipartisan. Both parties agreed to do this with so-called welfare reform, with the shift from aid for children with families with dependent children to TANF. And the point of this was to help single mothers who were on these long-term public income benefits get into the workforce. And at that time, there were some who said this was going to be a social catastrophe. It was going to put people homeless in the streets, cause misery and worse. In practice, it was a very successful social experiment. It brought millions of women back into the workforce, more income, more self-perceived well-being. I was asking in that piece, why can't we do the same thing with the reform of our dysfunctional archipelago of disability systems? I mean, in one way, taking a guy on the couch and getting him back to work would seem like a whole lot easier of a proposition than a mother who's looking after her children, a single mother. And I argued in that piece that there are people in Washington today who have seen a lot of that side of life, a lot of the disability side of life. Our vice president wrote a best-selling book about that in Hillbilly Elegy. So there are people who know it not just from the kind of computer basement side, there are people who know it from living experience. And that might give us some hope that people would address this question.
Rich, do you share Nick's optimism?
I share it in a pessimistic way. There is a major shock that's coming to the system. We all know it, but it's not going to happen for 10 years. And it's called the ending of the Social Security Retirement Trust Fund. Now, I told you the good news, the disability system corrected itself. It was going to do that a few years ago. And because of the actions with regard to reforms in the ALJ, they've got the prevalence rates down, so it's solid for 75 years. The problem is that the Disability Trust Fund is connected to the Retirement Trust Fund. And once the Retirement Trust Fund goes dry, then those monies in the Disability Trust Fund last for about 9 more months before both systems crash. So what should be done, and particularly for you people who are younger than me and actually care about retirement benefits, we are going to come to some reckoning on this. What needs to happen is that we need to understand that the DI program and this retirement program interact with one another, And for instance, one of the things that may happen is we're going to raise a normal retirement age again from 67 to 70. But that puts tremendous incentives for people at age 62 who will only get about 0.5 of their benefits at age 62 if they enter the retirement program, but get a full benefit if they become disabled. So the incentives have to be there to worry about. But also makes it all the more important that we're only putting people on the disability rolls who we fail to be able to get in, to remain in the workforce because VR tried, we spent the money to do it, and it didn't work.
I'm glad you couched that as an optimistic view. All right, young lady over here. Please, the ground rules are, please phrase your question in the form of a question. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for hosting such a significant discussion today. I'm a recent graduate from Court School of Public Policy at Georgetown University, and I'm an international student from South Korea who came to this country to study from great minds about how to develop policies amid shrinking and aging population. And I think what we're seeing right now in America, having increasing amount of young people in their prime age not being in the labor force, is also commonly happening in East Asian countries, actually more before than America, such as like Japan, South Korea, and even China right now. And when you see the reason why these prime age young men and women are deciding not to be in labor force, when we expect them to be the most at the stage of most passionate working age and like having families, is because they say they're depressed. Which I think is also associated with increasing disability, may not be associated with like rise of physical disability, but like mental and emotional disabilities. And I was, as a younger generation of this day coming from South Korea, I asked myself, then why are the younger generation having the rise in emotional and mental disability, preventing them from even participating in the workforce? Is because they just feel so discouraged and hopeless about the formula for success and social mobility that we were taught from young age. For instance, if we were taught, oh, if you study a lot in school, like if you have a better education, if you go to college, perhaps even graduate school, you will have that associated amount of increase in your income. But I feel like that is not the case anymore, especially compared to our parents' generation.
Okay, so I think we got the point. Rich, do you want to kick this off, or what are your thoughts?
Well, I guess what I would say is that you should stay tuned for the second panel, who are going to be talking about what vocational rehabilitation can do for folks with disabilities, both mental and physical, and what kinds of combinations of medical assistance and vocational training allow folks to overcome their abilities and get back into the workforce.
Anything to add?
Some of the problems that you describe are more intense in your country. Some of those problems are more intense over here. The short way of putting it, but that's maybe a later discussion.
Okay, one more question over here. Sure.
Okay. I accept that it's a problem. So what are the characteristics of these men? I mean, are they fathers? Where are they living? When did they go on the disability rolls? Did they ever work before they went on the disability roll? Just some answers about the characteristics of this population.
I can talk about the dropouts. Do you want to talk about the roles? I can talk about the profile of the dropout man. I mean, so there's 7 million, roughly speaking, prime age men. So there are a lot of stories. There are 7 million different stories. But there are some trends. So by education, less educated men tend to be disproportionately part of this pool, but it's not just less educated men. About 1 million out of the 7 million with college degrees, and as I recall, almost over 35% with some college. In terms of ethnicity and race, non-Hispanic Black Americans are more likely to be in the pool, but Hispanic Americans and Asian Americans are less likely to be in the pool. So if you did a kind of a white, non-white thing, it's kind of a wash. Way overrepresented are the never married men. Way underrepresented are the married men. Way underrepresented are foreign born. And native born are way overrepresented.
No,
Okay, all right. Well, we are unfortunately out of time for this panel. So join me in thanking Nick and Rich and Jennifer and that. All right, so we're going to take a short break to get the next panel kind of teed up, and we'll get going in just a few minutes. Thank you. Thank you. You want to speak from here, right?
But I need a ginger ale sip just before I start.
I'll go to the podium too.
Sure. That's all fine. You guys do whatever you need to do, whatever you're comfortable with.
Good. Thank you. Yeah, let's get.
Okay. Don't fall off over the edge there. So it's a little, yeah, just forward and back. Yep. Okay. All right. Okay, I think we're going to get going. And for our second panel, Jason is going to lead us off. So, Jason Turner of Secretary's Innovation Group. Thank you.
Okay, let's see. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we've had an interesting set of figures, and I want to begin by reiterating what we've learned so far on this panel, because I think it's extraordinary. First of all, that fully 10% of all men between 25 and 54 are not in the labor force and not looking for work. That, to me, when I learned it, was a surprise. And secondly, that around 2/3 of these men are on disability or living with someone on disability. So that calls into question the whole idea of that proportion of our male population doing nothing and having gotten themselves into one of the disability programs. And then that requires us to check how these programs are being administered and whether there's a better way to help people remain in the labor force instead of going on to a life of poverty and increased levels of depression and substance abuse that often accompanies disability. So let's take a look at the current way that disability is determined, and we're going to have on the next panel a description of something that we think can be adapted to a better system. So the current system, you apply for disability to the Disability Determination Bureau, and that's the application at the bottom of this panel. And over 6 to 8 months, the electronic medical records are reviewed to determine whether someone falls into the category of eligible for disability. Now remember, Rich described 4 reasons that disability has increased, notwithstanding that underlying health conditions over time have not gotten worse. And he described that fewer approvals are for medical reasons only. In other words, you don't meet it on medical reasons, so you're getting on for another reason. And what are these other reasons? Well, there's an increase in the number that get on for mental illness and back pain. And mental illness or conditions include depression and anxiety. Well, one of the antidotes for depression is getting out of the house and into the labor force where you're around people. But we'll leave that aside. The third is that the system has encountered an overwhelming number of people who are denied that go on to appeal it. And there's a whole legal industry made up of lawyers who take a percentage of back benefits if the case is overturned. And over 50% of them are overturned, Rich says. So it's not the original decision, there's a lot of overturned decisions that are putting more people on. And then finally, the list of available jobs that somebody could take, excuse me, has been kept to the 1970s level, limiting the number of people that could and should go to work. So now let's take a look at the next slide. Yeah. Okay. So here we see what currently happens, and then we'll see what does happen. So if you're not approved for disability, and 70 out of 100 people who apply are initially not approved, then 19 of these 70 people go through a two-step appeal process to an administrative law judge, lawyers on contingency, and of every 100 applicants, 43 are eventually approved. Next slide here. What we propose is something that utilizes an actual new service, which is a positive implementation of an idea, but not an idea, of a practice, which is current in helping individuals with health conditions. And that is that people with health conditions can oftentimes benefit from the vocational rehab system in every state. So vocational rehab differs from disability determination in this way. A disability determination looks at the rules in the Social Security and decides whether somebody should fit into one of those categories and puts them on disability, whereas the vocational rehab division takes those people who come to them and says, regardless of your health conditions, we want you to have a positive outcome of employment. So we're going to work with you and overcome the obstacles of people of your condition. So that's what we want to introduce in our proposal, our Secretary's Innovation Group proposal, modeled on Kentucky, that we'll hear about. So an applicant comes in at the bottom right to the Department of Disability Services, and all of his or her electronic medical records are transferred to the separate vocational rehab agency that then works with that person for the next 6 to 8 months while their application is being approved or denied. And many of those people will get jobs and won't need to continue the application process. And in addition, whereas the disability determination system doesn't actually meet with the individual applicant, it's an electronic paper file. The vocational rehab meets with a caseworker, an actual person that wants to help you find employment and overcome the situation, your health condition. So that person with experience and the system of VR together will form an opinion over whether someone who's applied for disability is capable of holding a job. And that's an important characteristic. And that concurrent approval from vocational rehab and disability determination will both have to agree that an individual is not capable of finding work in order for an application to be approved, we expect many people will go to work during the 60 to 8 months period, and you can decide that from yourself after you hear Kentucky's, how they work it on a DOL waiver. And other people who really are only looking for benefits and really could work will be determined ineligible for benefits, and they will go in to the labor force and in the end be personally much better off, and so will the country. Thanks.
Thank you, Jason. Johnny, floor is yours.
Thank you. We appreciate the invitation so much to be here, and I bring greetings from Kathy Shepard-Jones, Dr. Kathy Shepard-Jones, who is our principal investigator on this important work in Kentucky, and also from Cora McNabb, our Office of Vocational Rehabilitation Executive Director, who was kind enough to let us be a part of this project and be the implementation lead at the University of Kentucky on our Retain Kentucky grant. So thanks for the invitation, and I bring you again greetings from them. It's good to see folks in the crowd, many of whom I know and we've met before, and hate to start calling people out, but it's good to see our friends from ODEP and Mathematica here and others, such great guidance and partners along the way of this project for a number of years here in Kentucky. For the benefit of those who are online and may not be able to interact with the slides, I will share a bit that is on the slides, and I know I have more slides than I have time for. Sorry, I need to start going, don't I? I have more slides than I have time for, but we'll try to get through it quickly. I'll try to be quick, and you can listen quick. How's that? So in Kentucky, the Retain Kentucky project, as has been mentioned today, a U.S. Department of Labor grant that was looking at what can we do? How can early intensive intervention benefit someone who has an injury, an illness, or an impairment in terms of being able to stay at work, if they're currently employed, or be able to return to work. And 2018 seems like a long time ago, but that is when we began, and with 8 other states in that phase 1, and we were grateful enough to be awarded phase 2 contract that we've been in and just finished up in May of 2024 in terms of the official enrollment period and evaluation period, led by the Office of Voc Rehab, as we said, and really looking at that coordination between employees, employers, and healthcare providers. What I think we know probably isn't occurring on a regular basis when, let's say, Johnny is meeting with his doctor to be released to go back to work. What would ideally be occurring, perhaps, is that Johnny and his physician and his employer are having a conversation about what does this mean. Well, we know that would be ideally occurring, but we also know that is not really occurring in any substantive way, and that's part of what we wanted to affect. Part of what we wanted to study is when that does occur, does that make a substantive difference? And we'll hold that until the end and share a few numbers with you. We served 4,144 Kentuckians through April of 2025. Now again, we had an official enrollment period and evaluation period that ended in May of 2024. So we had a goal by that time of serving 3,200 Kentuckians. We effectively met the goal. And I know with Mathematica and others in the room, other experts, I probably can't say we effectively met the goal because we did fall, 46 people short. We fell 46 people short and served 3,154. And our goal again was 3,200. So what we did after May of 2024, again, when that official period ended, we did continue enrolling people through the remainder of our project period through April 1st of 2025, and we'll talk a little bit more about those numbers. And that's what the 4144 refers to over the course of the whole project period, including that last year or so after the official enrollment period ended. So again, the purpose to help Kentuckians with non-work-related injuries, illnesses, or impairments. And of course, that's very important. We're not talking about a workers' compensation program here. We're talking about those who have a non-work-related injury, illness, or impairment, keeping those folks at work longer, able to come back sooner. And this program, this project, I should say, was completely voluntary. I think that's a really important point to keep in mind. Nobody was required to do this. Completely voluntary. It didn't cost anyone anything. It was completely free. We did have some small incentives that we were able to provide. $100 gift card at enrollment and then a $50 gift card upon completion. May not sound like a lot, but to a lot of people, that's an incentive. And we do believe the incentive made a substantive difference in, an appreciable difference actually in the number of folks who were able to kind of stay on with us and finish the project, finish their retain to work plan, and we'll talk a little bit about in just a minute. One of the key strategies that we employed in the Retain Kentucky project was what we refer to as the Inclusive Worker Health Leadership Network, and that was a key strategy in our multi-systems improvement, innovation, and change goals with Retain Kentucky. And as you'll see on the screen, and again, I do for the benefit of some online who may not be able to see the slides, that was comprised of medical professionals, public health leaders, employers, workforce development, employees with disabilities, Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, and there were others. So we had a good mix in that network of folks who were at the state level who were decision maker type people, and folks who were on the ground who were practitioners, actually doing the work, meeting with patients, serving patients, counseling folks who were going back to work, and then also employees with disabilities. And again, focusing on that coordination of state and local initiatives, we wanted to make sure folks had an opportunity to have a timely return to work or have an effective ability to stay at work. Now, the thing that this group did, this network did, that we felt like was important is make annual recommendations to the governor. And that was always, we felt like always well received by the administration in terms of welcoming those recommendations. And these are things that, were really important, we felt like, to continue even past the project period and the grant period, hopefully to sustain a lot of the work that we were seeing be so successful. And we did have several recommendations. I wanted to point to just a few, and then I'll move on quickly. One of those was to increase employee awareness of workplace accommodations. That continues to be a question, right, from employers. One is, where are people who need a job? Where are people with disabilities? Another question is, persons with disabilities, what do we do about accommodations? Then a centralized access to stay at work and return to work best practices. That could be something like a web portal, a website. We went to work on that quickly, and it's something that we continue to see evolving and are happy to be a part of doing. And then highlight people with disabilities as an untapped talent pool. So those were three of a couple of other recommendations we made too, but three recommendations that really rise to the top and continue to be having a fair bit of traction and leading to several statewide events as well with workforce and healthcare partners. So I wanted to mention those very briefly. Here was our eligibility. Individuals had to be 18 years of age or older and a Kentucky resident, employed or had worked in the last 12 months. Individual must have been within 14 weeks of onset or worsening of their injury, illness, or condition. So we weren't talking here about folks who have been off work for a long period of time. So very specific population of people. And individuals' injury, illness, or impairment could not have been related to their work. And this, by the way, very importantly, excluded at the time receiving or having applied for SSI or SSDI. So you could not be receiving SSI or SSDI, and you could not have applied for those within the last 3 years. In terms of our recruitment, you see the referral sources here: healthcare employers, Kentucky Office of Voc Rehab, self-referral, also very important part of our success, community organizations, and digital learning. Digital recruiting. That was the other hat we wear sometimes. Digital learning is important too, but digital recruiting is what I meant to say here, and that was an important referral source for us as well. Let's talk a little bit about the process, and I'm trying to move quickly, I know in terms of our time. A couple of process slides here. Recruitment to referral, to eligibility determination, making sure we had informed consent, and then intake. And then what happened in this random controlled trial is that people were randomly assigned up until May 16th, 2024. Again, that official period, official sort of enrollment period, official evaluation period up to May 16th, 2024, randomly assigned. After that, everyone got the full intervention, the full treatment in terms of services, and it could also, after that date, it could also include SSI, SSDI beneficiaries. A lot more here to say about the importance of return to work coordinators and all the work they did to coordinate the efforts of healthcare and employers, really providing individual support, medical and vocational case management, vocational guidance, and addressing barriers. People who wanted to go back to work weren't always able to go back to work without barriers, whether that was childcare, that was transportation, or something else. So we were able to troubleshoot that, help identify those, and connect them to community resources. Last slide. Here are the numbers that we feel like are really important. Over the period of our project, more than 15,000 referrals. As I mentioned, 4,144 enrolled. Of those, 58.5% enrolled completed their plan. Of that number, 90%. Here's the real number for me. This is the lead. We buried it a little bit, but here it is. 90% of participants who completed their return to work, stay at work plans that were employed at exit. So we felt like that was incredibly successful. And other populations didn't seem to make any, again, appreciable difference. Criminal justice system, racial ethnic status didn't have an effect on those. And we penetrated nearly every one of Kentucky's 120 counties. So again, a pleasure to be a part of this work, a pleasure to have been entrusted with it, and to continue to learn from it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Good. All right, he's in the third hole, but we'll call him batting cleanup for now. Dave?
Yeah, well, I hope I come away cleaner than my first slide, which has the date of October 24th on it. Moving right along. So I am going to talk about the policy context for retain, and also talk about what we could do post-retain, or what Kentucky would like to do post-retain, and which I think is a very good idea and is related to some work I've done in the past. I think I would describe what we have today to support workers who stop working because of medical issues as a medical retirement system at the federal level, right? That's the support that we provide. We get them a chance to get on SSDI, SSI if they're really poor. They get Medicare after a couple of years, and they can potentially get Medicaid as well. And so it's set up to help workers who have medical problems retire. It's built around an outdated concept of disability or inability to work that is totally medically determined. And I think you've heard that from other speakers previously already. I won't repeat it. But it also ignores the enormous medical and technological progress, changes in jobs, and the importance of other personal characteristics of individuals that today are way more important than they were in the 1950s when the SSDI program was started. And I think the most important thing I will say today is that the current system serves many workers poorly, primarily the workers who are limited education, relatively low earnings histories. What happens, and you've heard Jennifer describe this, and I think the statistics as well from Nick, people get on the roll, people apply for benefits, they don't all get benefits, many of them in fact are denied. But even if they do get on the rolls, then they're out of the workforce, they're out of the main social activity that most people of working age participate in, and they're at home on the couch, and they don't do well. Lots of statistics about the poverty of the lives that many of them experience. I would also say that the system discourages work and encourages labor force exit. I think that's why we're here. And it's also very expensive. That's one of the reasons we've studied this a lot. But to my mind, the greatest problem is it serves many workers poorly. So we've had decades of expensive efforts to help people who are already on the rolls get back to work and get off the rolls, and they have failed. I don't say that casually. In fact, I sometimes say the only way these efforts succeeded were in keeping me employed for 25 years evaluating them. They just have not been successful. And there are many different reasons for that. And I can answer questions about that if you want me to, as well as many other things. But to my mind, those efforts have failed. I want to go back to the SSDI Solutions Initiative, which started up in 2015 and finished in 2016. This was McCrory and Pomeroy, two former representatives, led it. It was very bipartisan, hosted by the Center for Federal Budget Priorities. No, I'm sorry. What is it? CFRB.
Responsible federal budget.
Responsible, it's the RFB, that's what it's, Responsible Federal Budget. And so people like myself and others put in various proposals. The two leading proposals in terms of where they came out in the book and also in terms of the support they got from the people that were involved in looking at the proposals were both of a early intervention variety, helping workers who have medical conditions stay in the labor force before they get on Social Security disability benefits. One of those proposals was from Jennifer Christian, who you heard earlier today. And the other one was from myself and Yanni Ben Shalom, who's here, and some of you know here, as well as David Mann. We dubbed that the EES, and I'll come back and tell you why when we get there. Retain, as implemented in Kentucky as well as the other states, is very similar in concept to Jennifer's proposal. Kentucky has proposed enhancements to Retain that it would like to pursue going forward, which are designed to better serve workers with limited skills, limited education, limited work histories, the kinds of people that they had difficulty recruiting, that fell through the cracks, and we just don't know what happened to them, but presumably many of them ended up at SSA's doorstep applying for disability benefits. Specifically, what they want to do is recruit from SSDI and SSI applicants as soon as their state DDS has the disability application. And then in addition, they want to enhance the services they provide so that they can do a better job at providing medical services and also economic services for those who are so poor that they just can't get to work or to work on the things that they need to work on in order to go back to work. So this next slide shows you as a schematic that shows the current Retain program as implemented in Kentucky. And as you can see, the main thing that I want to point out here is they're recruiting volunteers from the medical system. They do it in multiple ways, but the volunteers that get recruited, they enroll in Retain and they get services. Some of them go back to work. In fact, many of them did go back to work, but some of them don't, and presumably most of them exited the labor force. So what they want to do now is to add a different part of recruitment to it, where they actually work with the State Disability Determination Service, which gets a ton of information about the applicant, initially medical information as well as work history information, and they can screen those applicants for ones who would really benefit the most from getting services from the Vocational Rehabilitation Agency. Those would be sent over to Retain, to the Retain program, which is operated by the VR agency. Some of them will not be successful. They will end up coming back, continuing the disability program application. A key issue is whether those who are recruited through the DDS and the SSA should be required to go to Retain and come back and only come back if they're not successful, or whether they could just continue to pursue their disability application as they're working on going back to work at the same time. So I would argue that, in fact, a mandatory program would be a lot less. What I think under a mandatory program is that we would see that a lot more disability applicants would end up returning to work. There'd be a significant number who would apply but not return to work, and they would continue in the disability program determination process and get disability benefits. And then there would also be quite a few who would drop out. They just don't want to work for other reasons that don't have to do with their disability, and they'll just drop out of the process. I also think the outcomes would be great for the economy under a mandatory program. There would be a reduction in labor force exits, a significant reduction, and also a net reduction in public expenditures. Every person we keep off the disability benefit rolls saves the federal government on the order of $300,000–400,000, maybe more, depending on their age and other things. And that pays for a lot of vocational services. You know, we may be talking $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 for the vocational services for a typical person here, but just saving, you know, reducing the number we get on the rolls by a small number actually would pay for those services. And we've done calculations and think that actually there would be a lot of money left over. There would be net federal savings for the federal government. But the magnitudes of all of the outcomes depend very much on how exactly the program's designed, how the screening is done, how the recruitment works, what the services are that are offered, et cetera. And also, of course, the economic environment, things that are beyond the program's control, which is always the case. If this was voluntary, though, instead, I think what we would see is that, yeah, some applicants would apply, but many of them would continue their disability benefit applications, and many might get disability benefits and just keep them and stop. Right? I also think workforce retention would be a lot lower, and that reductions in public expenditures might not occur at all. They're probably more expensive because we're spending a lot of money to help people that don't end up leaving the rolls. So that's pretty much it. My recommendation, and I know there's a lot of interest in Jason's group and others in trying to move on what Retain has done and add mandatory referrals to something like Retain from the State Disability Determination Service. I think this is a great idea. I'd really like to see it happen. I think it's very similar to the EES system that Leone and Dave Mann and I came up with, which basically integrates employment service with eligibility determination service, hence the EES, a riff on DDS. But I think it's really important to start with a small mandatory program. Invite states like Kentucky to step up, and I know there are many other states that would like to do this. I live in one of them, Vermont. In the process, they would learn and they could scale it up, right? We can make it larger and larger and with more and more success. I also think it's really important for those here and others not to be fooled by the current financial status of the SSDI program. As Rich pointed out, it's doing very well now. The 75 years balance looks great. It's still outdated. It's still not serving workers well. And while it's not financially in trouble right today, maybe that's the best time that we should be trying to make it a better program. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so same rules apply as before. Questions from our online audience, if you have them, send them to Hadar Zeevi, HADAR at AEI.org. We'll do some questions up here and then turn to the audience and online questions. So Dave, you referred to the concept of medical retirement and how expensive this is, and your quote was, decades of expensive efforts to help beneficiaries return to the labor force and exit the SSDI and SSI roles have failed. So I know I speak on behalf of everybody in the audience here that they're glad that you've had a long career studying the failure of efforts to get people on the rolls, off the rolls, but can you give us just 2 or 3 examples or reasons why that is so difficult and why on the other side, the effort to keep people from going on by successfully connecting them or reconnecting them with work is a better route.
Well, I could cite a catalog of failures, and I don't want to do that. But I think when I think about this, I think there's really two things that the main reason the past efforts have not been successful. One is by the time people get on the benefit rolls, and partly because of the long disability determination process, and also because there's a five-month waiting period after you stop working before that, they've been, if they're on the rolls, they've been out of work, out of the labor force for a long time. And so they're losing human capital, they're losing their personal connection with workers and their former employers and such. It just makes it harder for them to go to work. They also become, I think, sort of acclimatized to living with lower means and adjusting their lives to their new reality. But the other piece, though, is incentives. And if you go back to work after you're on the rolls, there is a period when you can keep your benefits for 12 months, essentially, but eventually you're going to lose them. And they can be $1,500 is not uncommon at all, or more. And so that's even if you might be earning $3,000 or $4,000 a month, that's a lot of money to give up. And I think we know from behavioral economics that a bird in hand is worth two in the bush. And so if you're already on the rolls, you've got your benefits, you don't want to lose them. But if you're not on the rolls yet, the potential, giving up your potential future benefits by going back to work doesn't seem quite as strong a disincentive, right? So I think those two things are the reasons fundamental reasons why the return to work efforts have failed. I mean, there are some others as well. But the other thing that makes me encouraged about early intervention is that the private sector, workers' compensation and private disability insurance has demonstrated, and as well as, and Rich talked about initiatives in foreign countries, has demonstrated that early intervention can succeed in keeping people in the labor force rather than getting them on the disability rolls.
Got it. Johnny, from the individual standpoint, from the recipient standpoint, what are the services that they most value or that turned out to be most effective in reconnecting them with work? And can you talk a little bit about the sort of tension that Dave pointed out between mandatory and voluntary services now, and how that might change or how results might change if what is now voluntary was made more mandatory in the future?
Yeah, I think for our participants, there were many benefits that we heard, but I think that coordination at that intersection of the employee, the employer, and the healthcare provider was just something that couldn't be overstated, and the importance of which couldn't be overestimated. We continued to hear how much easier that made these systems, which are often not navigable, if we're being honest, by most people on their own, how much easier, not easy, but how much easier that made these, often, again, not navigable systems more easy to navigate. So that coordination helped so much. And just having a plan, having a return to work plan that someone, and in our case, our return to work counselors, worked with these individuals on through the period of that project made significant difference. I don't know in terms of the last part, I'm not going to comment on the idea in terms of the idea that these gentlemen have so well shared, but what I will say is this. I think it could be interesting to apply a model like a retain to population of individuals who have been out of work more than 14 weeks. Keep in mind, we're talking about a different population of people really here. We looked at individuals who were within 14 weeks of onset of their injury, illness, or impairment, or worsening of that. So I do think it could be interesting to look at how that could apply and what, again, difference it could have with folks who have been out of work longer. And actually, that's a pretty exciting thing to think about in terms of the notion of something like that. I grew up in poverty. Many of you, some of you may have, and generational poverty in far eastern Kentucky and southeastern Kentucky, and in terms of requiring, or it's tough to require things, you know, there's so much going on in the mindset of individuals, again, that I grew up in. These are family, these are friends, these are acquaintances, these are people who know me and whom I know. This is where I'm from. And there's a lot going on that is more than just a few things that make these decisions often difficult.
Jason, so Dave makes the point, he mentions large savings. And of course, in this town, on the right, people think, aha, we're going to balance the budget. And on the left, we're going to cut people off and, you know, savage their lives, and, you know, nothing's going to be the same and all that. Put that in context. So from an individual standpoint, what does an individual stand to gain from not receiving benefits, but being more successful in going to work? You have a long history of helping people successfully go to work, including disabled folks in New York go to work. Kind of contextualize that for us.
Well, Matt, I would say the following, that the difficulty of having somebody who's been on benefits for a while to change their behavior and take advantage of opportunities to leave the system is very difficult for psychological reasons. We find that in the world, in our efforts to help people help themselves, you have to catch them at the outset. And so what we did in New York City, when people walked in for TANF benefits and they claimed they couldn't work for health reasons, and they produced a letter from their Medicaid doctor, we sent them to our own doctors for a independent medical assessment. And we found that of 100 people that went there, only 17 were really unable to participate in a work activity. And of the rest, about half could work with accommodations and half needed to make certain adjustments to their medical situation, like starting taking their pills for hypertension. And so we ended up really assessing somebody and then keeping them in, most of them, in the labor force opportunity track. And we found that was really the only way to really get somebody who has a health condition, because there's a big psychological transition that takes place from opportunity to move ahead with one's life in this direction and preservation of a guaranteed income.
Right.
And that becomes very, very powerful after a period of time.
Right.
Okay. We'll go to audience questions in a second. So Jennifer Christian from the previous panel that couldn't join us in person actually sent in a short statement, and she asked me to read. I won't be able to read all of it, but I'll read some of it. And it kind of follows what Johnny said. It's critical to recognize that workers who are faced with a change in their health that affects their ability to work are ill-prepared and poorly equipped to deal with their situations. They don't know what they don't know. They're in the dark about how to get what they need from the healthcare system, their employer's benefits program, who's in charge of the return to work process, and are often afraid of returning to work, then failing and being fired. Johnny, is that what you find and what you help people overcome?
That sounds about right.
Okay. Dave, let me...
Matt, could I just make a
Yeah,
comment?
sure, of course.
Both responses to Johnny and Jennifer. The word mandatory I've used, and it's commonly used, but I think it's a little bit maybe misleading or unfortunate. I think that the way I would see this is that the visit to the VR agency for that initial assessment would become part for some people, would become part of the disability determination process. We require disability applicants to do other things, like take a medical consultation, right, exam, right? And not all of them, but just selected ones that are screened out. And this would be similar to that. And I think that, by making it a required part of the disability determination process, that introduces the possibility that they'll actually meet a vocational counselor in person who can, first of all, get a lot of information from them, assess their situation, but also tell them what's possible, right? And if they don't, if we make it voluntary, they may never get to that point, right? That's the point.
Got it. Okay. So previous panel, Nick was optimistic about legislative changes. Rich was both optimistic and pessimistic, depending on how you listen. Let me pose the same sort of question to you, Dave. Are there things that SSA can do working with the states to expand things like retain? Would those be good things that would be done, even if Congress doesn't weigh in with legislation?
Yeah. So without your caveat, there are lots of things that the states could do with SSA. Kentucky actually applied SSA, this is 2 years ago now, to do what I described, work with the DDS, get the referrals on a voluntary basis, and SSA declined to participate in that, not because they thought it was a bad idea, but because they thought it would be too burdensome. They had limited funds, too burdensome on their operations folks in the DDS and the SSA offices that serve that area. So it's partly a matter of will from the Social Security Administration. However, it is also true that SSA currently does not have demonstration authority to change any SSDI rules, and that would be including changes for the disability determination process. For SSI, it's fine. There is under Title 16, they do have waiver authority that they could use to do that, but not for SSDI. And now the question is whether you can change the application process, because SSA does have regulatory authority over they have a lot of discretion in how they actually do disability applications, but they can't make those changes overnight. They have to go through a regulatory process to do it.
Got it. Okay. Let's turn to the audience. Young lady in the front here, and same ground rules apply. Please phrase your question in the form of a question and be brief.
Hi, Lisa Dixon, soon to be an early retiree from the government. So I'm just interested as opposed to a professional interest. But I guess this question is really for Johnny and maybe the Kentucky program. How much of the secret sauce is the personal counseling or attention given to somebody as opposed to making the process more transparent and just information better available?
Yeah, I mean, hard to quantify that, but hard to overestimate. And I think I indicated that a few minutes ago. I'm not sure how I said it, but hard to overestimate the importance of that personal connection. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, if you're going to scale.
Yeah.
How hard is that going to be?
I don't know. Again, with the processes we had in place, we feel like we had a process that could be pretty flexible when those numbers went up. And when those opportunities, even when it was often, sort of a barrage of opportunities, we felt like because we built a process that was strong and flexible and adaptable, we felt like it could mitigate against some of those challenges and keep that personal connection intact.
Dave?
I think it's fair to say that their success was because of systemic changes, not because of the individuals involved. That's what you're getting at. And I don't know a lot about the evaluation or in other states either, but I was involved early on in finding the models that the retain programs followed more or less. And we used a workers' compensation program that was in Seattle. They have a public workers' compensation program as opposed to a private benefit. And they very systematically used counselors or they call them coordinators, to coordinate between doctors, between employers, and other people involved in the care of an individual. But they had done a very systematic job of it and put it in place and scaled it way up. So I think they still use it today. So,
All right, let me ask a wrap-up question for y'all. Each of you, in 30 seconds, what would your message be to parents who may have one of these adult children living in their house, who may be struggling with depression, may be having difficulty going to work, could theoretically benefit by these programs? Or just taxpayers who recognize that they need to support, through their work and tax payments, these sorts of benefits. Is there a positive story at the end of this, a negative story, something neutral? What would be the message that you would deliver to those folks to try to sort of translate the Washington salon conversation we've had here to real life for them? Johnny, you want to start?
Sure. I think we in Kentucky have a significant workforce shortage, and that's not unique to Kentucky. We have some population issues too. Our workforce really has consistently or continued to decline, for the last 20 or so years. We looked at the prime age worker information too. We're about 1.5 points, lower than national numbers there. And then we've lost. I know this is not just prime age men, but prime age workers overall. We've lost about 100,000 prime age workers in the last 20 years. When we think about people with disabilities, and in America, in our nation, it's about 1 in 4 Americans with a disability. In Kentucky, it's 1 in 3. It's about 37.5% actually. And only less than 40% of those are employed compared to their non-disabled peers. And we've got a 50% gap, or we got a very large gap that ranks us 50th in the nation right now. My message and my plea would be, we don't have the luxury of leaving anyone behind.
David Jason, what's your elevator speech summary?
Well, I'm probably off on a bit of a tangent here, but I always come back to my friend Gene Sterling's recent book. The title is "Abandon: How Republicans and Democrats Deserted the Working Class." I think here we have an opportunity to do something for the working class, specific people in the working class who are really struggling, leaving the workforce and not doing well. And we can do it in a way that will reduce government expenditures if we do it well. And I would say that the proposal to extend retain in the way that's been described would have that feature if done well.
Jason, you get the last word.
I would say that as a program administrator and looking out at the country and the number of individuals who are entering a decline in the well-being, their personal well-being, by entry into the disability system I think is a crisis. And we have shown in the past that we can help people maintain their independence with support. And I think the vocational rehab system can play that role.
Okay. Thank you all. Thank you for Nick and Rich and Jennifer on the previous panel. Please join me in thanking our panel.
Thank you. Well done, Matt.
Okay.
Okay.